I thought my sister's wedding would be the perfect chance to finally feel beautiful, to show everyone that I wasn't just the awkward younger sister anymore. I spent weeks finding the perfect dress, something that would make me feel confident, for once. But when Victoria saw me walk into the church that morning, her face twisted with disgust. She looked me up and down like I was wearing rags to her royal wedding. What she said next would have crushed me completely if I hadn't noticed something else. Her new husband, Marcus, wasn't looking at her when she spoke those cruel words. He was looking straight at me, and the expression on his face. It changed. Everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of Victoria's wedding started like any other day, except for the knot of anxiety that had been growing in my stomach for weeks. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror of the hotel room we were sharing, trying to convince myself that today would be different. Today, I wouldn't be invisible. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 26 years, I'd lived in the shadow of my older sister, Victoria. She was everything I wasn't: tall, blonde, effortlessly beautiful, with the kind of confidence that filled every room she entered. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who preferred staying home with a novel rather than going out to bars and parties like Victoria did almost every weekend. Growing up in our small house in Millfield, Ohio, our mother had always made the distinctions clear, though never intentionally cruel. Victoria was the pretty one who would marry well. I was the smart one who would need to rely on my brain. It wasn't malicious, just matter of fact, the way some families have a tall child and a short child. We had a beautiful child and a plain child, but something had changed for me over the past year. I'd started working at Henderson & Associates, a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Cleveland, and for the first time in my life, I felt valued for something beyond just being reliable. My boss, Jennifer Carson, had taken notice of my work, and I'd even been promoted to senior analyst. With my new salary, I'd been able to move out of the tiny apartment I'd shared with 2 roommates and into my own place. More importantly, I'd started taking care of myself differently. I'd joined a gym, not to lose weight, but to feel stronger. I'd gotten a new haircut that framed my face better, highlighting the green eyes that were my one feature I'd never hated. I'd even started experimenting with makeup, watching YouTube tutorials late at night until I could create looks that made me feel put together rather than like I was playing dress-up. The dress hanging on the hotel closet door was the culmination of all these changes. It was a deep emerald green that brought out my eyes, with a fitted bodice that showed off the subtle curves I'd always hidden under loose clothing. The fabric was silk, and when I'd tried it on at the boutique 3 weeks ago, even the sales assistant had gasped. It wasn't flashy or inappropriate for a wedding. It was elegant, sophisticated, and it made me feel beautiful. I'd spent more on that dress than I'd ever spent on any single piece of clothing in my life, but it felt like an investment in a new version of myself. The version that Victoria would see today and finally recognize as her equal, not just her little sister trailing behind. Victoria was already up and getting ready in the adjoining suite with her bridal party. Through the thin hotel walls, I could hear the excited chatter of her 3 bridesmaids, Melissa, Ashley, and Courtney, girls she'd been friends with since high school. They were all cut from the same cloth, perfectly styled, effortlessly, social, the kind of women who never seemed to have an awkward moment or an insecure thought. I hadn't been asked to be a bridesmaid. Victoria had explained it away by saying she wanted to keep the wedding party small and intimate, just her closest friends. The fact that her college roommate Courtney, whom she saw maybe twice a year, had made the cut while her own sister hadn't, wasn't lost on me. But I'd accepted it with the same resigned grace I'd practiced my whole life. The ceremony was at St. Matthew's Church, the same church where our parents had been married 32 years ago, and where Victoria had been baptized as a baby. Marcus Thompson, her fiancé of 2 years, was everything you'd expect Victoria to choose. He was a successful real estate developer with offices in 3 cities, tall and handsome with the kind of easy charm that made everyone like him instantly. I'd met Marcus several times over the course of their relationship, usually at family dinners or holiday gatherings. He'd always been polite to me, asking about my work and seeming genuinely interested in my answers, which was more attention than most of Victoria's boyfriends had ever paid me. There was something about him that seemed different from the usual parade of men Victoria dated, less superficial, more thoughtful. I'd caught him reading during one family barbecue while everyone else was focused on gossip and small talk. But he was Victoria's, completely and obviously devoted to her. The way he looked at her when she entered a room was the way every woman dreams of being looked at, like she was the most magnificent thing he'd ever seen. They were perfect together, the kind of couple that made other people feel envious and hopeful at the same time. I finished applying my makeup with more care than usual, trying to recreate the look I'd practiced dozens of times. The emerald dress fit perfectly, hugging my body in ways that made me stand straighter, walk differently. For the first time in my adult life, I looked in a full-length mirror and didn't immediately start cataloging my flaws. The drive to the church was quiet. Victoria had left earlier with the bridal party for photos, leaving me to ride with our parents. Mom kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror with an expression I couldn't quite read. Dad, never one for much. Conversation hummed along to the radio. "You look lovely today, Sarah," Mom finally said as we pulled into the church parking lot. "Thank you," I replied, but something in her tone suggested she was surprised by this fact. The church was already filling with guests when we arrived. I recognized most of the faces: family, friends, relatives I saw only at weddings and funerals, people from Victoria's work and social circle. I took my seat in the second pew, behind where our parents would sit, and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building all morning. The church looked beautiful. Victoria had always had impeccable taste, and she'd transformed the simple sanctuary into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White roses and baby's breath adorned every surface, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Everything was perfect, just like Victoria always managed to make things perfect. Marcus was already at the altar with his groomsmen, looking handsome in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He was chatting quietly with his best man. Probably his brother David, if I remember correctly, but I could see the nervous energy in the way he kept adjusting his tie. Even confident people got nervous on their wedding day, I suppose. The bridal party began their procession, each bridesmaid floating down the aisle in their pale pink gowns. They all looked stunning, of course, like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale. The music swelled, and everyone stood as the wedding march began. Then Victoria appeared at the back of the church, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She was absolutely radiant. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, with a train that seemed to go on forever. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate updo that showcased the diamond earrings that had been our grandmother's. She looked like a princess, like she'd been born to walk down that aisle. But as she passed my pew, her eyes found mine, and her perfect smile faltered for just a moment. Her gaze traveled from my face down to my dress and back up again, and I watched her expression shift from surprise to something that looked almost like anger. She recovered quickly, her smile snapping back into place as she continued toward Marcus, who was watching her approach with pure adoration written across his face. But in that brief moment, I'd seen something in my sister's eyes that I'd never seen before when she looked at me. I'd seen her see me as competition. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Victoria and Marcus exchanged vows they'd written themselves, speaking about love and partnership and building a life together. Marcus's voice cracked slightly when he promised to love her for all the days of his life, and even I felt tears prick my eyes at the genuine emotion in his words. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Marcus kissed Victoria with the kind of passion that made everyone in the church smile, I applauded along with everyone else. They looked perfect together, walking back down the aisle as husband and wife, hands clasped tightly together. The receiving line formed quickly outside the church. I waited my turn to congratulate the happy couple, watching as Victoria graciously accepted compliments and well wishes from each guest. She was in her element, glowing with happiness and the satisfaction of a perfect day. When I finally reached her, Victoria's smile became strained around the edges. "Sarah," she said, her voice carrying a tone I recognized from our childhood, the one she used when she was about to say something cutting. "That's quite a dress." The way she said it made it clear that quite a dress was not a compliment. Several people around us were still within earshot, and I felt heat creep up my neck as I realized she was setting up to humiliate me in front of everyone. "I thought it was appropriate for the occasion," I replied quietly, hoping to deflect whatever was coming. Victoria's laugh was light and musical, the same laugh that had charmed teachers and boyfriends and employers for years. But I'd heard this particular version before. It was the laugh she used when she was about to deliver a blow disguised as a joke. "Well, I suppose when you don't have many occasions to dress up, you might go a little overboard when you finally get the chance," she said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "It's just so much. For a church wedding, I mean. But then again, you probably didn't know better." The words hit exactly where she'd intended them to. In one sentence, she'd managed to remind everyone within earshot that I was the sister who didn't go to parties, who didn't have a social life, who didn't know how to dress for occasions because I never had occasions to dress for. She'd reduced me back to the awkward little sister who didn't belong in the world of beautiful, confident people. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and something deeper, the familiar ache of being diminished by the one person whose opinion had always mattered most to me. I opened my mouth to respond, though I had no idea what I could possibly say that wouldn't make things worse. That's when I noticed that Marcus had gone completely still beside his new wife. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. While Victoria had been speaking, I'd been focused on her words, on the familiar feeling of being made small. But now I realized that Marcus wasn't looking at Victoria. He wasn't smiling at her cleverness or nodding along with her assessment of my inappropriate dress choice. He was looking directly at me, and his expression was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't pity or embarrassment on my behalf. It wasn't the polite discomfort of someone witnessing an awkward family moment. It was something else entirely. Something that made my breath catch and my pulse quicken. Something that transformed Victoria's cruel words from a moment of humiliation into something that suddenly felt much more complicated. Because Marcus Thompson, my sister's brand new husband, was looking at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire. Marcus's eyes held mine with an intensity that made everything else fade into background noise. The congratulations from other guests, Victoria's expectant smile as she waited for my response to her cutting remark, even the sound of the church, bells that had started ringing to announce the new marriage. I'd spent so many years being invisible that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. Not just noticed, but seen. The way Marcus was looking at me now made me understand the difference. "Sarah looks beautiful," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter around us. His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made several nearby conversations pause. Victoria's head snapped toward her new husband, her perfectly practiced smile flickering like a candle in the wind. "Of course she does, darling," she said quickly, but I caught the slight tightness around her eyes. "I was just saying the dress is so bold for her usual style." "Sometimes bold is exactly what's needed," Marcus replied, still looking at me. There was something in his expression that made my cheeks flush, but not with embarrassment this time. Before Victoria could respond, Marcus's mother appeared beside us, pulling him into an enthusiastic hug and launching into effusive praise about how perfect the ceremony had been. The moment broke, and I found myself swept along in the crowd of well-wishers, but I could feel something had shifted fundamentally in the space between us. The reception was being held at the Riverside Country Club, a sprawling venue that overlooked Lake Henderson. Victoria had wanted something elegant but not too formal, sophisticated but not stuffy, requirements that only she could somehow make sense of and deliver flawlessly. The main ballroom had been transformed with cascading white flowers, soft lighting, and round tables draped in champagne-colored linens. I'd been seated at table 7, strategically positioned between our elderly great-aunt Dorothy, who was nearly deaf and tended to speak in non-sequiturs, and Victoria's college friend, Jennifer, who had brought her new boyfriend and seemed more interested in taking selfies than making conversation. It was exactly the kind of seating arrangement that said family obligation rather than valued guest. The cocktail hour gave me a chance to observe the social dynamics I'd never been central enough to understand before. Victoria moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, accepting compliments on everything from her dress to her choice of flowers to her new husband. She had this gift for making each person feel like they were the most important guest at the wedding, while somehow maintaining her position at the center of everything. Marcus was more subdued, playing the role of gracious host, but without Victoria's natural flair for performance. I watched him shake hands with business associates, embrace old friends, pose for what must have been hundreds of photos. He was good at it, but it seemed to require effort in a way that socializing never did for Victoria. During dinner, I found myself stealing glances at the head table where the newlyweds sat with their wedding party. Victoria was radiant, laughing at something one of the groomsmen had said, her hand resting possessively on Marcus's arm. They looked perfect together, the kind of couple that would have beautiful children and successful careers and dinner parties that everyone wanted to be invited to. But every so often, I would catch Marcus's attention drifting across the room. Our eyes would meet across the sea of tables and conversation, and I would feel that same electric jolt I'd experienced outside the church. It was probably nothing, just the natural tendency to look around a room, to check on guests and make sure everyone was having a good time, but it felt like something more. The speeches began after the main course. Marcus's best man, David, told embarrassing stories about their college years that had everyone laughing. Victoria's maid of honor, Melissa, gave a touching tribute to their friendship and how perfect Victoria and Marcus were together. Our father, never comfortable with public speaking, kept his remarks brief but heartfelt. Then Marcus stood to thank everyone for coming, to praise Victoria as the woman of his dreams, to talk about their future together. His words were exactly what you'd expect from a groom's speech: grateful, romantic, optimistic. But as he spoke, his eyes kept finding mine in the crowd, and I began to wonder if I was imagining the connection or if something real was happening between us. After dinner, the dancing began. Victoria and Marcus's first dance was to At Last by Etta James, and they moved together with the easy grace of people who belonged with each other. Victoria's dress swirled around her as Marcus spun her, and everyone watched with the satisfied smile people get when they see a perfect couple doing exactly what perfect couples are supposed to do. I'd never been much of a dancer. School dances had been torture, and I'd avoided situations that involved dancing as much as possible throughout my adult life. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the dress. Maybe it was the way I'd seen myself in the hotel mirror that morning. Maybe it was the unexpected moment with Marcus. Whatever it was, when Great Uncle Robert asked me to dance during a slow song, I said yes. Robert was 83 and could barely hear the music, but he was a gentleman from another era who believed in proper dancing. He guided me through a simple waltz, chatting about how lovely the wedding was and how proud our parents must be. I was surprised to find that I didn't feel awkward or self-conscious. The dress moved beautifully as we turned, and I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrored pillars around the dance floor. I looked graceful. I looked like I belonged there. When the song ended, Robert thanked me and headed back to his table. I was about to follow when someone touched my shoulder. "Would you like to dance?" I turned to find Marcus standing behind me. The band had just started playing something slow and jazzy, and couples were swaying together all around us. Victoria was nowhere to be seen, probably touching up her makeup or talking to relatives. "I shouldn't," I said, though every part of me wanted to. "Say yes. It's your wedding day. You should be dancing with your wife." "Victoria's busy with her photographer," Marcus said. "Something about golden hour lighting for more portraits, and you look like you were enjoying yourself out here." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. Dancing with Marcus was nothing like dancing with Uncle Robert. Marcus was tall enough that I had to look up at him, and he moved with a confidence that made it easy to follow his lead. His hand on my waist was warm through the silk of my dress, and when he pulled me slightly closer during a turn, I could smell his cologne, something clean and masculine that made my pulse quicken. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly as we swayed to the music. "For what?" "For not saying something when Victoria made that comment about your dress. She was out of line." I felt heat creep up my neck. "She's your wife now, Marcus. You don't need to apologize for her." "Maybe not," he said. "But I need to apologize for not telling you how stunning you look tonight." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to acknowledge. This was dangerous territory, a conversation that could change everything or destroy everything, depending on how it played out. "Marcus." I started, but he shook his head. "I know," he said. "I know this is complicated. I know this is my wedding day, and I know Victoria is your sister. But I also know that I haven't been able to stop looking at you since you walked into that church this morning." The song was ending, but neither of us stepped away. Around us, other couples were separating, heading back to their tables or moving to dance to the more upbeat song the band was starting. We stood there in the middle of the dance floor, his hand still on me, mine still on his shoulders, looking at each other like we were the only two people in the room. "This can't happen," I whispered, though I made no move to step away from him. "I know," he said again. "But it already is happening, isn't it?" Before I could answer, before I could figure out what to say or do or think, Victoria's voice cut through the music and conversation like a blade. "Marcus, there you are, darling. The photographer wants to get those sunset shots by the lake before we lose the light." We stepped apart quickly, probably too quickly, like teenagers caught doing something forbidden. Victoria approached us with her usual radiant smile, but her eyes were sharp as they moved between her new husband and her sister. "I hope Sarah wasn't boring you with talk about her work," she said lightly, linking her arm through Marcus's. "You know how she gets when someone actually listens to her." It was another perfectly aimed barb, designed to diminish me while appearing playful. The implication was clear. I was so starved for attention that I would monopolize the groom at his own wedding reception. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral, "we were just dancing. Sarah's quite graceful." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How sweet. Well, come along, darling. We don't want to miss the perfect lighting." As she led Marcus away toward the photographer, she glanced back over her shoulder at me. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before when she looked at me. Fear. Victoria, who had never been afraid of anything in her life, who had always been the beautiful one, the confident one, the one everyone wanted to be around, was afraid of me. And as I watched them walk away together, Marcus's hand in hers, I realized that everything between the three of us had just changed forever. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I retreated to my assigned table, nursing a glass of wine and making polite conversation with Great Aunt Dorothy about her cats, while my mind replayed every moment of that dance with Marcus. The warmth of his hands, the way he'd looked at me, the words he'd spoken that couldn't be taken back. Victoria and Marcus returned from their photo session just as the cake cutting was beginning. She had refreshed her makeup and seemed to have regained her composure, laughing brilliantly as she fed Marcus a bite of their 3-tiered vanilla and raspberry creation. The photographer captured every moment, the flash creating little bursts of artificial daylight in the dimming ballroom. But I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way Victoria positioned herself between Marcus and the rest of the room whenever possible. How her smiles became more pronounced when other women were nearby, especially attractive women. The subtle way she guided conversations away from topics that might make Marcus seem too interesting to other people. I'd always attributed these behaviors to Victoria's natural desire to be the center of attention. Now I wondered if they were something else entirely, the defensive maneuvers of someone who'd built her entire identity around being the most desirable person in any room, and who couldn't afford to let that status be challenged. Around 10 o'clock, Victoria began making rounds to thank guests for coming. The older relatives were starting to leave, and the party was transitioning from formal reception to late-night celebration. I watched her work the room with practiced efficiency, spending just enough time with each group to seem gracious without getting trapped in long conversations. When she reached my table, she was alone. Marcus was across the room talking to his college friends, far enough away that our conversation would be private. "Sarah," she said, sliding into the empty chair beside me. "Are you having a good time?" There was something in her tone that put me on edge. Victoria never asked if I was having a good time. She usually assumed I wasn't, and she was usually right. "It's a beautiful wedding," I said carefully. "Everything looks perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" Victoria's smile was sharp around the edges. I worked so hard to make sure every detail was exactly right. The flowers, the music, the seating, arrangements. I'm very particular about making sure everyone knows their place. The emphasis on the last words made it clear we weren't just talking about table assignments anymore. "Victoria, if this is about the dance with Marcus—" "Oh, that?" Victoria laughed. But it sounded forced. "Don't be silly, Sarah. I'm not worried about you dancing with my husband. I mean, it's sweet that he was being polite to you. Marcus has always been kind to people who need kindness." The pause before "people who need kindness" was deliberate and cutting. She was reminding me of my place in the hierarchy we'd established. Over 26 years, I was the sister who needed charity, not the one who inspired desire. "But I did want to talk to you about something," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about the dress being appropriate for the occasion. And you're right, of course. It is appropriate for someone who doesn't understand the subtle social rules that govern events like this." I felt the familiar twist in my stomach that came with Victoria's more sophisticated cruelties. She'd refined her technique over the years, learning to deliver wounds that looked like compliments to anyone not paying close attention. The thing is, Sarah, when you're not used to being in certain social situations, it's easy to misread signals, to think that politeness means something more than it does, to mistake courtesy for, well, something else entirely. She reached over and patted my hand in a gesture that would have looked sisterly to anyone watching, but her grip was just tight enough to hurt. "I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself by misunderstanding something that was just Marcus being the wonderful, kind man I married. You know how you sometimes get ideas about things. Remember when you thought that professor in college was interested in you, and it turned out he was just being helpful because he felt sorry for you?" The reference to Dr. Williams hit exactly where she'd intended. I'd been 22 and naive, and I'd completely misread his mentorship as romantic interest. When I'd finally worked up the courage to ask him for coffee, his gentle but firm rejection had been mortifying. The fact that Victoria had remembered that humiliation and saved it for precisely this moment was a masterclass in psychological warfare. "I understand," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. I knew you would. Victoria's smile warmed back to something that looked genuine. You're so sensible, Sarah. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. You know your limitations. She stood to continue her rounds, pausing to kiss my cheek in a show of sisterly affection. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to think about calling it an early night. You look tired, and we don't want you to do anything you'll regret tomorrow. As she walked away, I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like I'd been systematically dismantled and rebuilt as a smaller, more manageable version of myself. Victoria had taken the most wonderful moment I'd experienced in years, that dance with Marcus, the feeling of being seen and desired, and transformed it into another example of my own inadequacy and self-delusion. The worst part was that some of what she'd said made sense. Maybe I had misread the situation. Maybe Marcus was just being kind to his new sister-in-law, and my own desperation for attention had made me see something that wasn't there. Maybe I was doing exactly what I'd done with Dr. Williams, projecting my own wishful thinking onto someone who was simply being polite. I excused myself from the table and headed toward the bathroom, needing a few minutes alone to process what had just happened. The corridor outside the ballroom was quieter, with just a few guests stepping outside for air or privacy for phone calls. I was almost to the ladies' room when someone called my name. Sarah. Wait. I turned to find Marcus walking toward me, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked like he'd been searching for me. Are you leaving? He asked. I was just getting some air, I said, not wanting to admit that I was actually fleeing from my own humiliation. Good, because I was hoping we could talk. He glanced around the empty corridor, then nodded toward a small alcove near the windows that overlooked the lake. Privately. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to politely decline and go home. Victoria's words were still echoing in my head, reminding me of every time I'd misread a situation, every moment of embarrassment I'd endured by wanting more than I deserved. But there was something in Marcus's expression that made me follow him to the alcove anyway. I need to ask you something, he said once we were out of sight of the main corridor. And I need you to be completely honest. With me. Okay, I said, though my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. What did Victoria just say to you? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I saw her talking to you at your table, and I saw your face when she walked away. You looked like someone had just torn down everything you'd built up about yourself tonight. I stared at him, surprised by how accurately he'd read the situation. She was just giving me some sisterly advice. Sarah. Marcus stepped closer, and I could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I've been married to your sister for exactly 6 hours, but I've been dating her for 2 years. I know what Victoria looks like when she's being protective of something she considers hers, and I know what people look like after she's finished protecting it. The observation was so astute and so unexpectedly loyal to me, rather than to his new wife, that I felt tears prick my eyes. She reminded me not to misread politeness for something else, I said quietly. She's probably right. I have a history of misunderstanding social situations. Do you think that's what this is? Marcus asked. A misunderstanding? I looked up at him. This man who had just married my sister, who was standing too close to me in a dark alcove while his wedding reception continued without him. Everything about the situation screamed danger and complications and heartbreak. I don't know, I admitted. Well, I do, he said. This isn't politeness, Sarah. This isn't me being kind to someone who needs kindness. This is me being completely honest with you about something I probably should have realized a long time ago. He reached up and touched my face gently, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. I married the wrong sister. The words hung between us like a confession that couldn't be taken back. In the distance, I could hear the band playing something upbeat, the sound of laughter and celebration. Victoria was probably wondering where her new husband had disappeared to. Guests were probably taking note of his absence, but none of that seemed to matter in the space between his words and whatever came next. "Marcus, you can't say that," I whispered, though I made no move to step away from his touch. "I can't take it back either," he said. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" His confession hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back from his touch, pressing myself against the cool window glass, trying to create distance between us and the impossibility of what he'd just said. "You don't mean that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're caught up in the moment, in the emotion of the day. People say things at weddings they don't mean." Marcus didn't step back. If anything, he moved closer, trapping me gently between his body and the window. "Sarah, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I've been trying to convince myself for months that what I was feeling was just pre-wedding nerves, or cold feet, or some kind of last-minute panic about commitment. Then what changed your mind? Seeing you tonight, seeing you confident and beautiful, and refusing to let Victoria make you small. Dancing with you and realizing that for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." The music from the ballroom swelled, and I could hear Victoria's laugh rising above the other voices. She was probably holding court at the head table, regaling the remaining guests with stories about their honeymoon plans or their new house in Westlake. "Marcus, you married her 3 hours ago. You promised to love her for the rest of your life. In front of 200 people and God and I meant it when I said it," he interrupted. "Or I thought I did. But promises made in ignorance don't have the same weight as promises made with full knowledge of what you're giving up." "What are you saying?" He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the careful styling his groomsmen had spent an hour perfecting. "I'm saying that I've been in love with the idea of Victoria for so long that I forgot to pay attention to whether I was actually in love with Victoria herself. She's everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, accomplished, the kind of woman who makes other men envious. But tonight, watching her try to tear you down just because you looked stunning, I realized something about her that I'd been ignoring, which is, she's cruel, Sarah. Not just thoughtlessly self-centered, but deliberately cruel. And I don't think I can spend the rest of my life pretending that's just a character quirk I need to accept." I wanted to defend my sister, to explain that Victoria wasn't cruel, just protective of what was hers. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I knew he was right. Victoria had always had a streak of meanness that she deployed strategically, and I'd spent so many years being the target of it that I'd normalized it as just the way sisters interacted. "Even if that's true," I said, "it doesn't matter now. You're married. People don't just walk away from marriages on their wedding day because they suddenly realize they have feelings for someone else." "Don't they?" Marcus asked. "What if walking away now saves everyone years of misery? What if staying married to Victoria while feeling this way about you is actually the more selfish choice? You're talking about destroying her life, about humiliating her in front of everyone she knows, about turning her perfect day into the worst day of her life. And what about your life?" Marcus stepped closer again, his voice intense. "What about the fact that you've spent 26 years hiding who you really are because Victoria couldn't stand the competition? What about the fact that you're brilliant and beautiful and funny, but you've been convinced you're none of those things because admitting them would threaten her sense of superiority?" His words were like a key turning in a lock I'd kept sealed for years. All the times I'd downplayed my accomplishments so Victoria wouldn't feel overshadowed. All the times I'd dressed down or stayed quiet or made myself smaller so she could remain the shining star. All the opportunities I'd passed up because they might have put me in direct comparison with my sister. I never thought of it that way. Of course you didn't. Because you're kind and generous and you love your sister despite everything she's done to keep you in the shadows. But I'm seeing you clearly for the first time tonight, and I can't unsee it. the sound of footsteps in the corridor made us both freeze. Marcus stepped back quickly, and I smoothed down my dress, trying to look like we'd just been having a casual conversation about the weather. "Marcus? Darling, where are you?" Victoria's voice carried that particular edge it got when she was trying to sound casual, while actually being anything but. She appeared around the corner a moment later, her smile bright, but her eyes sharp as they took in the scene. "There you are," she said, moving to Marcus's side and linking her arm through his with practiced ease. "I've been looking everywhere. For you." The Hendersons are about to leave, and they wanted to say goodbye. "Of course," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "I was just telling Sarah how much I enjoyed our dance earlier." It was a dangerous thing to say, a deliberate provocation that made Victoria's grip on his arm tighten almost imperceptibly. "How sweet," Victoria said, her smile never wavering. "Though I hope you're not keeping Sarah from her beauty sleep. She looks absolutely exhausted." The dig was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria was reminding all of us that I was the type of person who needed beauty sleep, while she was the type who looked radiant no matter what. "Actually, I was just about to head back to the hotel," I said, seizing the opportunity to escape, before this situation became any more complicated. "Oh, but you can't leave yet," Victoria said, and there was something almost predatory in her voice. "We haven't had our traditional sister dance. You know, the one we always talked about having, at my wedding." I had no memory of ever discussing a traditional sister dance, which meant Victoria was improvising some new form of torture in real time. "I don't think—" "I insist," Victoria said, already tugging Marcus back toward the ballroom. "It'll be so sweet. Marcus, you can dance with my mother while Sarah and I have our moment." There was no graceful way to refuse without making a scene, so I found myself being led back into the reception. The band was playing something slow and sentimental, and Victoria guided me onto the dance floor with the same determined smile she'd worn all day. "This is nice, isn't it?" she said as we began to sway together. "Just the two of us, celebrating my special day." "Victoria, what are you doing?" "I'm dancing with my sister at my wedding reception. What does it look like I'm doing?" But her grip on my hand was too tight, and she was holding me too close, like she was afraid I might try to escape. "You know what I realized tonight, Sarah?" she continued, her voice so low that only I could hear it. "I realized that I've been too generous with you over the years. Too willing to let you fade into the background instead of making sure you knew exactly where you stood. I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do. I think you've gotten some ideas tonight about things that belong to me. And I think you need a reminder about what happens when you reach for things that are out of your league." The music was beautiful, and to anyone watching, we probably looked like two sisters sharing a tender moment. But Victoria's words were poisonous, delivered with the same sweet smile she'd worn while cutting the cake. "I want you to listen very carefully," she continued, spinning me gracefully, so that we appeared to be having fun. "Marcus is my husband, not just legally, but in every way that matters. He chose me, Sarah. Not because he had to, not because I was convenient, but because when he had every option in the world, he wanted me. Victoria, I'm not finished. You've spent your whole life wanting what I have, and I've let you think that maybe someday you'd get your turn. But the truth is, there will never be a place for you in the world I live in. You're not built for it. You don't have what it takes to keep a man like Marcus interested once the novelty wears off." She dipped me then, a perfectly executed dance move that brought her face close to mine. "So here's what's going to happen," she whispered. "You're going to finish this dance, congratulate me one more time on my beautiful wedding, and then you're going to go back to your little apartment and your little job and your little life. And you're going to forget whatever fantasy you've been spinning in your head about my husband." She pulled me back up, spinning me one final time as the song came to an end. "Because if you don't," Victoria concluded, her smile never faltering, as the other guests applauded our dance, I will make sure that everyone in our family knows exactly what kind of person tries to seduce her sister's husband at his own wedding reception. The threat hung in the air between us as the band transitioned to their next song. Victoria released me and stepped back, clapping her hands together as if we'd just shared the most wonderful moment. "That was lovely, wasn't it?" she said loudly, enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm so glad we could have that special moment together." She kissed my cheek, and as she pulled away, she whispered one final message meant only for me. "Choose wisely, Sarah, because this is the only warning you're going to get." Victoria's threat echoed in my mind as I stood frozen on the dance floor, watching her glide away to rejoin Marcus with that triumphant smile still plastered on her face. The other guests continued dancing around me, oblivious to the psychological warfare that had just taken place disguised as a sweet sisterly moment. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. I slipped out through the French doors that led to the country club's terrace, grateful for the cool night air against my flushed skin. The reception was winding down. It was nearly midnight, and many of the older guests had already departed. Through the windows, I could see Victoria holding court with the remaining partygoers. Marcus standing beside her with what I now recognized as a carefully maintained facade of contentment. The terrace overlooked Lake Henderson, its dark surface reflecting the scattered lights from the clubhouse. It was peaceful here, away from the music and laughter and the suffocating weight of Victoria's ultimatum. I leaned against the stone railing, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning, I'd been Sarah Mitchell, the quiet sister who lived in Victoria's shadow and had finally found the courage to wear a dress that made her feel beautiful. Tonight, I was Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd discovered that her sister's new husband was in love with her, and who now had to decide whether to pursue that impossible connection or retreat back into the safety of invisibility. I thought I might find you out here. I turned to see Marcus stepping through the French doors, his tuxedo jacket draped over his arm and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked tired but determined, like a man who'd made a decision and was prepared to see it through. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "Victoria will notice you're gone again." Victoria is busy planning the after-party with her bridesmaids. Something about hitting the hotel bar and reliving every perfect moment of her perfect day. There was a bitter edge to his voice that I'd never heard before. "She won't miss me for a while." He joined me at the railing, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "What did she say to you during that dance?" he asked. I considered lying, or deflecting, or giving him some sanitized version that would spare his feelings. But something about the way he was looking at me, like my answer actually mattered, like my feelings had weight and significance, made me tell the truth. "She told me to stay away from you. She said if I didn't, she'd make sure everyone knew I tried to seduce her husband at his own wedding." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark water. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but filled with steel. "She's not wrong about that last part, you know. You are trying to seduce her husband. And it's working." I felt my cheeks burn. "Marcus, that's not what Sarah." He turned to face me fully, his hands coming up to frame my face. "I need you to stop apologizing for wanting something. Stop making yourself small because Victoria told you that's where you belong. Stop acting like your feelings don't matter as much as everyone else's. But they're going to destroy so many people. Your marriage, my relationship with my family, your reputation." "My marriage was never real," Marcus said firmly. "I see that now. I married Victoria because she was everything I thought I was supposed to want, not because she was what I actually needed. And as for our families and my reputation, Sarah, I'm 31 years old. If I can't make decisions about my own life because I'm worried about what other people will think, then what kind of life am I really living?" The conviction in his voice was startling. This wasn't the uncertain man who'd been questioning his feelings an hour ago. This was someone who'd made a choice and was prepared to face the consequences. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm going to tell Victoria the truth. Tonight, as soon as the reception is officially over, I'm going to tell her that I made a mistake, that I can't be the husband she deserves, and that I want an annulment. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Sarah, I spent 2 years trying to convince myself that what I felt for Victoria was love, when really it was just compatibility, shared goals, a life that looked good on paper. But what I feel for you? He paused, searching for the right words. It's like the difference between a photograph of a sunset and actually watching the sunset. One is a nice picture you can hang on your wall, but the other changes your entire understanding of beauty. I wanted to argue with him, to point out all the reasons why this was impossible, why we couldn't build something real on the ruins of his marriage to my sister. But standing there in the moonlight, with his hands still cradling my face, and his eyes looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world, all my rational arguments seemed to evaporate. Victoria will never forgive me, I whispered. Victoria has never really seen you anyway, Marcus replied. She's been so busy keeping you in a box labeled little sister that she's missed who you actually are. Her forgiveness isn't something you need, Sarah. It's something she needs to earn by learning to see you as an equal instead of a threat. Before I could respond, the sound of the French doors opening made us both step apart. I expected to see Victoria, her face twisted with rage at finding us together again. Instead, it was my mother, looking tired but still elegant in her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress. "There you are, Sarah," she said, seeming to take in the scene without judgment. "I was wondering where you disappeared to." "Mom, you were having the conversation you should have had 2 years ago," she said matter-of-factly, surprising both of us. "Before Marcus got engaged to the wrong daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and I stared at my mother, who looked remarkably calm for someone who'd just dropped a bombshell. "You knew?" I asked. "Sweetheart, I've been watching you two dance around each other at every family gathering for 2 years. The way Marcus's face would light up when you'd contribute something intelligent to the conversation. The way you'd blush when he'd ask about your work. The way Victoria would get that sharp look in her eyes whenever she caught the two of you talking." She moved to stand beside us at the railing, gazing out at the lake with the expression of someone who'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "I kept hoping one of you would figure it out before it was too late," she continued. "But you were both so convinced that Victoria was the obvious choice, the right choice, that you ignored what was actually happening between you." "Mom, what are you saying?" I asked, afraid to hope that I was interpreting her words correctly. "I'm saying that love is rare, Sarah. Real love, the kind that makes you better than you thought you could be, is so rare that when you find it, you have to fight for it. Even when it's complicated. Even when it hurts other people. Even when it means admitting you made a terrible mistake." She turned to Marcus then, her expression becoming more serious. "But I'm also saying that if you're going to do this, you need to do it right. Victoria deserves honesty, not deception. She deserves to know that her marriage is ending because you fell in love with someone else, not because you suddenly decided she wasn't good enough." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I understand. And I take full responsibility for my part in this mess. I should have been honest about my feelings a long time ago." "Yes, you should have," my mother agreed. "But dwelling on what should have happened won't help anyone now. The question is, what are you going to do moving forward?" I looked between my mother and Marcus, these two people who seemed to understand something about my life that I was only just beginning to grasp myself. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I don't know how to want something this much. I don't know how to fight for it." "Then it's time you learned," my mother said gently. because you deserve to be loved by someone who sees all of who you are, not just the parts that don't threaten anyone else. The French doors opened again, and this time it was Victoria who emerged, her face flushed with champagne and celebration. She stopped short when she saw the three of us standing together, her eyes immediately going to Marcus's proximity to me. "Well, this is cozy," she said, her voice carrying that dangerous sweetness I knew too well. "Having a little family meeting without the bride?" "Victoria," Marcus said, stepping forward. "We need to talk." Something in his tone must have warned her, because her celebratory expression began to shift into something warier. "About what, darling? Can't it wait until tomorrow? I'm having such a perfect evening." "No," Marcus said quietly. "It can't wait." And as I watched my sister's perfect mask finally begin to slip, as I saw the first flicker of real fear in her eyes, I realized that everything was about to change. For all of us. The perfect wedding day was about to become something else entirely, and, for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop being sorry for taking up space in the world. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.